Hello, I'm Nan Simonson, and I do a Facebook Live almost every week, and it usually usually has to do with something that has caught my mind involved some additional um, interest that I've just garnered in a subject. And we just finished our Thanksgiving weekend. Today is Tuesday, the 30th of November. Thanksgiving was Thursday, and all of us, I believe, were encouraged to pay attention to what it is that we can find joy and appreciation of rather than as we have for this past, what is it, almost two COVID years, been struggling to do. And I am particularly fond of a neuroscientist. You've heard me speak of him. This is a matter of fact. I wonder if I have a photo of him. Um, well, this is a photo of him, but he's looking down, and it's not the best photo. Um, I don't know. Now that's a terrible photo of him. His name is Dr. Huberman, Andrew Huberman, and he has the Huberman Lab at Stanford University. He's a professor of neuroscience and of ophthalmology as it relates to how our eyes, which are part of our brain, affect how our brain works. And so whatever he says isn't coming to us based on his opinion or his, uh, let's say, because he backs up everything with science. So, what am I talking about? I posed the question, is your gratitude practice serving you well? And I have been practicing gratitude for, well, years. I go to bed at night thanking the universe, thanking God, thanking who it is up there that I can't put my finger on or around us. Um, that has blessed my life, and I wake up in the morning grateful that I have another day. But that's not very specific, and that's helpful. That's certainly better than focusing our attention on what isn't working or what our worries are, and taking things for granted. But what I heard from this podcast of Dr. Huberman's, and I'll give you the title of it a little bit later, uh, and it was 2.5 hours, and I played it 3 times, gave me something more that I'm going to do, gave me a new context, and I wanted to share that with you. And I hope I can do this in a succinct way. And I absolutely took notes, and I will give it to you that way rather than trying to act like I wrote it or that these are my ideas and therefore putting a real personal spin on it. The benefits of a regular gratitude practice have a long lasting, and I'm going to read what he said, impact on our subjective well being. Subjective meaning this is what people report, including happiness, well being, joy, and even awe in life. Now, this is the subjective part, but a lot of what I'm going to tell you is going to be scientifically proven because they have ways to measure brain activity. Studies show that a often practiced, well, um, I'll say formulated gratitude practice can provide resilience to trauma and our ability to reframe previous traumas by buffering the physiological and psychological ill effects of that. But just as important, it can inoculate us from future traumas by helping us shift something called the prosocial and defensive networks. I didn't know anything about prosocial networks, but that's part of our brain. The defensive networks, that's part of our brain. Did you have any idea that one they're sort of a seesaw of, I'll call it attitude, but I'm using layman's terms. But actually, our neurological preference to responses, and unfortunately, in that seesaw, the um, defensive networks tend to carry more weight because they could keep us safe than the prosocial. And the prosocial is our way of embracing maybe more possibilities, and yet when we do what we can do, and our gratitude practice is part of that, to weigh on the side of our pro-social network circuits and neurons, um, we can actually recreate our go-to way of looking at life. I'll take that. I'll take that any day. And I'll give you a little bit more in terms of specifics on that. Um, the brain connections are affected when we are literally physiologically affected when we have trained ourselves to respond in one way or another. I don't know about you, but I could name uh, too many people whose first response to almost anything is negative, foreshadowed by fear, doubt, suspicion, sarcasm. And you might say, well, that person has a half empty, half full, glass is half empty, half full way of looking at life. Yeah, but that's not a neurological um, imperative. That's not a neurological result. And yet, you know what? It could be. It could be that that person is simply responding to, again, that go-to neurological feedback loop to life, and has no idea, or maybe doesn't care, that they can change that. And there are a number of ways that we can change the way we look at life, but if we can do it with a simple gratitude practice, who would have thunk, right? Who would have realized that we have that kind of control? And I love this because we do. The neurological effects are on par with pharmacological and physical activities like high intensity training and exercising and overt interventions that people can do to kind of shift a temporary mood. Well, we can do this in a way that it can actually shift it long term and ongoing. Gratitude is what is called a prosocial mindset. Um, that doesn't mean that it's about our needing to or working with others in order to make that relevant. That can simply that just has to do with individuals, including ourselves. So this isn't specifically about pro-social, meaning groups or gatherings or people. It just means that instead of backing away, which actually the defensive networks can create that kind of almost a physiological, not almost a physiological response of backing away, of covering vital organs. That can be something that, well, it's part of our ancestral behavior. Um, and you can see why that possibly carries more weight than our pro-social potential. And yet again, we can affect that. Um, Pro-social behaviors allow us to be more proactive, effective, interactive with others and ourselves, more relaxed, happier, and capable of feeling real, true joy. The networks in the brain are specifically wired for pro-social thoughts and behaviors, or again, for the defensive networks and behaviors. Let's see, the networks in the brain that are wired for defensive behaviors include behaviors based on fear, suspicion, resentment, and are designed, as I said, to be activated than the prosocial. So we have to work at the prosocial in order to get the best outcomes and to shift to prosocial dominance. It looks like my computer is freezing, but I'll just keep going. Um, Gratitude practices are geared to bring us closer to the prosocial networks and the circuits, and that's what we can take control of, especially if we have some directive as to how to bring about the best practices. There are practices that a lot of us have heard of, and I've promoted them even with my work with patients at Lifestyle Medical as a health and wellness coach. And that is making lists of things that you're grateful for. Um, uh, um, Thanking people as often as you can, making um, phone calls, sending out notes to tell people that they matter. All of that is good, and that actually helps us raise our dopamine and other neurotransmitters. But then there's another possibility, and that is something that has to do with immersion of gratitude from story. And that's what Dr. Huberman, through his research in, in preparing for this subject, was surprised to find. He said, I, himself, as well as most of us, have not been practicing in the most effective way. He said, science and the research that I uncovered has taught me something new and something I'm adopting, and therefore shared it with us. And by the way, I'll give you the name of this because it's a 2 hours, 30 minutes. You can listen to it as I did, one, two, three times, and come up with a clear understanding of what he's talking about each time you hear it. And I do most of my listening when I'm exercising, which I do for an hour and a half every morning, either on my bike or on our nearby mountain. I'm training now for another 10K run, and so I'm out there a lot. And I always have a headset on, and I always have podcasts going. Um, so you can do two things at once. The article or the YouTube title that you're looking for is The Science of Gratitude and How to Build a Gratitude Practice. The Science of Gratitude and How to Build a Gratitude Practice. And he is Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's a 44-year-old man. He's a relatively young professor, and he gives his time free because he had some hardships in his early life, and he believes that what he knows that is backed by science can make a difference in all of our lives. And so he is prolific with his podcasts, and I, I just love what he has to say. Um, in subjects that I don't agree with everything. Um, we have different lifestyles in a number of ways, including the way I choose to eat is whole food plant based, um, with a whole food plant based lifestyle, which I've done now going on 4 years. But that doesn't preclude my appreciation of what he knows and how he disseminates it. Okay. Um, All right, so a gratitude practice is geared to bring us closer to a pro-social network, and it does it in a using using repetition, and I'll tell you what I mean by that as well. All right, so there are neuromodulators that are involved in a number of things. I've spoken actually a couple of times about the neuromodulator dopamine, and dopamine is an activity neuromodulator. It is one that we feel great not gratitude, that's the wrong word. Um, it makes us high when we achieve something and makes us want to go out and do that again. So it's an activity related neuromodulator. What is most involved with our gratitude practice is serotonin. Serotonin is a calming neuromodulator. It helps us want to stay and experience that same thing. It will allow us to be curious and willing to do that again. And that's something that plays very well in what we're talking about today. The main brain areas, and of course, Dr. Huberman is going to talk about this, that are involved in gratitude is something, well, they are the anterior and the medial prefrontal cortex right behind our forehead, actually over here. No, over here. Left side behind the forehead. But the medial prefrontal cortex is what is most involved. And the prefrontal cortex, you've probably heard this, is most active in logical thinking, in planning. It makes us human, in foretelling where we can be based on activities now. It's our thinking, acting, and responsive part of our brain. But there's something I had never heard before and didn't understand, and he made a big point about this, is that it also sets context. Context is how we view a thing. In other words, it gives meaning to what we do based on the way we view it. So keep in mind that the prefrontal cortex sets context, and that context is going to determine how we view and what we're going to do about a thing that we're experiencing. An example of context. If you threw cold water at me and I wasn't expecting it and I didn't want it, and I would, first of all, hate the feeling, it's cold, but I would also be very angry, and I would have a very negative response to it. And yet every day when I take a shower, I turn the cold water completely off, sorry, the hot water completely off, and I do a 2 minute cold shower, freezing cold. And I'm just as cold as I would be if you threw that water at me, but I have a different context. I'm actually enjoying it, feeling the tingle. I'm enjoying the fact that I know that I'm making a difference that I'm stimulating my immune system. The heat shock proteins are being stimulated, and that I'm actually making a difference physiologically in my body. So I enjoy that, not because it's not cold, it's cold either way, but I enjoy it because of the context under which I see it. So we can affect that context, and one of the ways that we can affect it is, again, with a gratitude practice, and we'll look at that as I continue. So it's my decision to view an action or an event. We can't lie to ourselves. If I tell myself something doesn't hurt, and I am really sad about it, and I tell myself, oh, it didn't bother me at all, and we do that sometimes. We'll just say, well, just I'm not giving you a good example of that. If I resent something and I can't get over that, in other words, I can't reframe, and I've learned to reframe a lot of things, and it's really saved me emotionally. But if I haven't, and I'm still angry and hurt and full of resentment, and I tell myself it doesn't bother me at all, I can't lie to myself. I can't, without doing some additional work with that, simply change the context and have it change me physiologically. But I can change the way that I view it on a number of levels. And once I've done that, then I'm able to change not only my physiological response to it, but also my the context. In other words, the way I view it, and from that point on, I can be all right with it. This is a dark way of putting it, but there are people who have lost loved ones to in vicious ways, to people who were vicious when they took a life, and yet, without using just words, they've allowed themselves to love that person. They've allowed themselves, let's forget the love, to um, to forgive, and they mean it. To actually forgive. Who does that help? It doesn't even matter if it helps the other person, even though it kind of does. But it helps that person by reframing in terms of all of their physiological functions, because the brain is affected by the way we think. But I'm on a tangent. Okay. Um, so let me get back to where I was. Oh, okay. The most effective way to practice gratitude is through immersion and through stories. And let me just tell you something that he even starts his podcast with, and that is the a study that was done with people in different areas, different genders, different times of day, didn't matter, but they all had a measurement of their response, a physiological measurement of their heart rate and their respiratory rate, and they were shown a movie. They were shown a story, a story put into movie form, and every one. Well, I won't say every one of them. In general, the the majority all responded with a respiratory rate and a heart rate that was very similar throughout. In other words, they were changed physiologically based on what they were seeing that set a context in their mind, because the story was quite a narrative and affected them physiologically. So again, scientifically, they showed that we are affected quite a lot to story and to visual, especially if we can kind of see it in our mind's eye. All right. So, in with gratitude, how would we put that into the context of a story? And this is what he found from these research studies that he focused on that surprised him the most. That it's not just our making a list of what we're happy about and having that change our our circuitry that was most robust. It was our feeling the results of gratitude first by either gratitude toward us for something that we had done. It's a memory of, a story of our being involved in something in such a way that we affected another person to the degree that the story that's involved here was an action, a preempt, a result, a feeling. Meaning, right place, right time, doesn't matter. There was an acknowledgement, and how did we feel knowing that we had made the difference? In other words, gratitude toward us. If we can't come up with anything like that, that we can sink our, I'll call it anchor into, because this is something that is going to be part of the ongoing gratitude practice. It can be by our being aware of, and there's a lot of this. You can see this on in a book you read, on a podcast, the story of somebody else's life. I'm thinking of I have a book, and it's the Korean vegan, and she is a whole food plant based chef, And she has a very popular podcast, can't even remember her name, but she tells stories in these podcasts, and she has millions of viewers. And they're 1 minute, so I believe it's Instagram. And she will talk about a situation while she is putting food together. The recipe is available, but it's less cooking class and more about a story. Well, one of the stories that she tells in her book and that she told in one of these podcasts was, and her parents were from North Korea, that her mother was about to be killed as a baby by her parents because they were escaping North Korea. The baby had been hungry for days and she had cried, this woman's mother, the chef's mother, as a baby for days and days. She was starving to death. And that the parents thought, we can't do this to our child. They were going to drown her to put her out of this torturous situation. And what happened is an American soldier, they were trying to get to a port where there were ships that they could get out. And an American soldier saw this baby, understood, didn't know they were about to drown her, and gave them a candy bar, a chocolate bar. And that chocolate bar given to this baby to melt in her mouth saved the baby from starving, saved the baby from crying, and basically the parents were then able to cuddle this child, to nurture the child, and it brought her through to where they needed to go, and they were able to get out safely, but it saved her mother's life. That would be a great gratitude story. I have one that came to mind immediately, and it had a lot to do, I think, maybe if you've heard me before, you know I wrote Aging Powerfully, but the first part of my book is a memoir, and that memoir has a lot to do with, and I'm doing this almost as a, what is that, second person? Because I wrote the story of the people who kind of saved me in my young years when things were not good at all. And I can go back to those stories and how grateful I was, and I can use that in that way as well. I can also think of people who have written me and told me the what they had gotten out of the book that made a difference in their life. So I'm able to use that, but it could be either way. It could be somebody else's story, but there needs to be a lot of context, not just a quick little bit, so that your mind can wrap itself around the circumstance as it plays out, end result, and then feelings attached. It can be you, it can be somebody else's story. The recommendation is not to keep jumping from story to story, but have this story that you can play through your mind in whatever amount of time it takes, again and again, to the degree that you can drop into that story with even just a little, I was going to say clickbait. Isn't that that's such a dismissive way of saying it? But even in just a few thoughts or a few words, in a minute, by clicking into that story, and your mind has already played it through, that can give you the same neurological hit that he's talking about as it relates to firing up the neurons in our brain that will play out and affect us physiologically in such a way that we are able to be physiologically, mentally, emotionally, um, in terms of our immune system, in terms of our general health, affected by a gratitude practice. Um, we will develop the neuroplasticity to the degree that, again, we can drop into that story very quickly because it's become part of a reality to us. Let me see if there's anything. We're prone to be triggered by repetitive thoughts and narratives. I said that. These practices change the experience of our mind and our body when we drop into these states. Uh, Again, use the same story, uh, keep coming back to it again and again. The long lasting and permanent effects of this have been studied and documented. Repeating your gratitude practice changes the way your brain circuits work. Um, you can change your resting state and emotional and cognitive states, and all you have to do is do this a few times a week. Now, I have found since I listened to this, because I first heard this before Thanksgiving, and I've played the podcast, as I've said several times, I have done it every day and even a couple of times a day because it's really easy to, when you get in a habit of something, to to drop into it. And I can't see any reason not to take a couple of moments, and you can still have your list of things you're grateful for. I did that at Thanksgiving. What 3 things are you most grateful for in your life? And the 8-year-old was the first to have an answer, and the 11-year-old grandchild, and we all did it, and that was very nice. And there's value in that, but he has found that there is the most value that affects, and again, what are we talking about? We're talking about the circuits of the defensive network and the prosocial network. This affects your prosocial networking of your brain, and will balance you more toward that response as you go through all circumstances in your life, rather than the defensive network response. And we want the prosocial response because it can color everything in your life and the way you respond to everything in your world. Um, I think I've said enough. I think I've said everything I need to say. I'm if you're on, if you see this at some time, I would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, take real good care of yourselves. Consider the practice, consider what it can mean to you. And I wish you a great day. Take care. Have a great day because I know I'm going to.